Alright, welcome to part 2 of the Korg Opsix video, and in this part we're just going to dive straight in where we left off at the last video. So we're going to take a look at some slightly more interesting stuff. In this video we did a lot of the basics in the first one, so we can kind of move on to some other stuff in this video. So one thing we didn't talk about so far is the modulation matrix in the Opsix, which is a bit limited, to be completely honest. If we enter the mod matrix, we can just hit mod and we get into the modulation. We can see we have 3 envelope generators and 3 LFOs. And that's all we have. Of these envelope generators, 2 are already pre-assigned. We have envelope generator 1 going to the pitch and envelope generator 2 going to the filter. And the LFOs, LFO 1 goes to the operator and LFO 2 goes to the filter as well. So it's kind of already taken in a sense. Controls here are pretty much the same as in the regular envelope generator. You have the attack, decay, release. And we can set the curves, linear or exponential, and sustain. That's all the same as in the other ones. Pressing mod again will just move you down, so that's all the parameters we get in here. In the LFOs we get the different shapes. These are all pretty standard shapes with some variations, some step shapes. Step randomized, randomized levels, randomized time, and some different saw shapes. All of these can be time synced if you want. They can have a fade in, which is pretty neat for LFOs. And they can either be key synced commonly or per voice. Now if you want to assign a modulator, we can go into the patch, which is shift and modulate. That moves us in the virtual patch bay. And this is actually a very easy to use and very flexible little screen here. So you can just choose your modulation source. So for instance, we can choose the LFO 1. We can select a destination. So let's send that to operator 1 for the pitch for now. And we have modulation. You can also send it through a control, which is a pretty neat little thing. So let's send it through the mod wheel. And now we can control the amount with the mod wheel, with this amount being the max amount. So we can kind of limit the range of the mod wheel. That way you can also choose to control it with a pitch wheel or only the pitch wheel plus. Pitch wheel minus. Pedal, which is not attached. A note. So lower notes will have less modulation, higher notes have more. Velocity, exponential velocity, release velocity, aftertouch, which this keypad does not feature. Through the envelope generators or LFOs. And that's basically your options here. So that's pretty neat. Good to know here is that from the sources you can also use CV. So you can actually take a CV in and send that to any destination, which is quite a neat little thing to add some extra modulators to this thing. As you're limited to that small amount of modulators, you can actually send modulation from your DAW, or perhaps from virtual analog synthesizers to add to this synthesizer. There's a total of 12 of these mod slots. which is not all that insane, as every modulator can only have one destination and you have 6 operators. If you want to affect a parameter from every operator, you're already at 6. So it does fill up fairly fast if you want to do a lot of modulation, but in general it's pretty okay. I think the coolest thing here is to talk a little bit about all the destinations you have, because that's actually pretty insane. So you can set to the pitch, ratio, octave, transpose, level. Always good, of course. So we need to have the LFO. Attack time, release time, sustain, FM feedback. Width. And there's also some parameters which will do nothing, because this first operator is currently set to an FM operator, so the filter cutoff and that sort of stuff doesn't work. But that's an important thing to talk about. So let's actually switch this to a filter. So now we're in the filter mode. Let's turn this to saw. And I'm actually in the wrong operator. So let's try that again, shall we? Filter, saw. Back into the mod matrix, there we go. So now we can set it to the filter cutoff. And if we add a little bit of resonance here, it becomes more pronounced. And we're actually affecting the filter. And this is pretty cool, because this is a filter that's only for this operator. So if we add another voice, that's not affected by that filter. And that's pretty flexible. And you have all those options here as well. Now another pretty neat thing you can actually do is not send it to a operator, you can also send it to the effects. Envelopes as well, LFOs, so you can LFO and LFO if you want to modulate the filter cutoff, for instance, for the entire patch. That's pretty fun. But I think the effects part is especially interesting. So let's set our effect to, let's do a delay, because that's always nice for demonstration purposes. So we have a little delay. Let's actually turn up the delay time a little bit more feedback. As you can see, it's fairly easy to make a mistake with the knobs. There's a lot of times in the beginning, especially, where I used to grab the program knob as a sort of general encoder, which is simply not how it works. This only changes your selected patch. Nice little note there, by the way, is if you're editing something and you spin this, it will only preview the patch, and you can just select no. And we're back into the patch where we used to be. Right, modulation is what we were talking about. So right now it's set to the delay level, which is not what I want. I actually want to set it to the delay time. Now here's another one of those things which is a little bit annoying. You can't set it to both delay times at the same time. You can only set it to one of the two parameters, which is a little bit annoying, because now if you want to do the left and the right delay with the same settings, you need to do this twice. And if you want to change the setting, you need to change the setting in both. You can't do that in one go, which is a little bit annoying, especially since there is no intermittent CC control, so you can't CC it together to control it in one go. It's pretty neat though, because it does some pretty weird things. So let's see what we have going on here. Let's grab that LFO, let's make it a lot slower. So it's pretty neat. It's a little bit like a guinea pig now. So the V-patch section is pretty powerful. As far as I know, there's no way to copy these things around. That's a little bit of a shame as well, because that would have made this sort of stereo thing where you have a left and a right easier to move along by just making one, then copy to the other, and then only having to turn it from left to right. It's those little quality of life things where I think they can still improve a little bit upon the UX of this thing. Although, to be fair, for how relatively menu heavy the synthesizer is, it's still pretty easy to navigate, because you have these encoders and you have these hands-on controls. The amount of time you're actually flipping through menus is pretty low, and that's actually something I really admire at its synth. For the complexity it offers, it's actually fairly simple to navigate. Let's turn off the modulation. Let's talk about a few of the overall controls. You can go into the voice menu. Here you can set it to poly or mono with glide. Or legato. Poly modes. We can actually detune as well by adding unison. Which can be either mono or wide stereo. Now this affects, of course, all the voices, because it's on a patch basis. In the MISC you can find some program settings like the pitch bend, range, your algorithm feedback options. Here you can generate user algorithms, and you have the option to copy operators, which is pretty cool. And you can also copy the envelope generators to make it a little bit easier to clone settings in your patch. But here we are missing the option to copy the V-patch stuff, which would have been nice to have. Your global settings, you have your master tune, your transpose, your MIDI settings like the MIDI channel, internal or external clock, and some control stuff for the sequencer with triggers and all that sort of stuff. Brightness of the display, auto power off, all that good stuff. Not that interesting to talk about really. We haven't touched on the Arpeggiator yet. Arpeggiator is pretty easy to initiate. Just press Arpeggiator. You have an Arpeggiator. If you hold it, it will start to blink. If you do it properly, there we go. And now it's keyed-edged. You can go into the Arpeggiator settings. Change gating and speed. Range. And you have some patterns to your liking. You play around with those. It's not incredibly complicated, but also it's an arpeggiator. It's meant to be fairly simple. to operate, but it's very nice to have there, and especially that ledge option is very nice with the shortcut of just holding it down. You can quite quickly engage it and have some fun with that. Alright, one burned hand and torn fingernail later. It's a good thing I'm not a hand model. Let's pick up where we were. So I'm going to have to re-record a sequence, so let's just quickly get into that. Play, record. So one thing the Opsix can do that's actually pretty cool is that it can record motions as well. So for this we are just going to jump into the filter, and what we can simply do is play back and record. It will capture that motion. So you can record up to 6 layers of motion, all on these controls, but also on the sliders. So let's record something on that side as well. And these motions are also key triggered. Which is pretty dope. You can of course change the playback order, and the motions will also be different. We can see the recorded motions here in the sequencer screen as well. So you can see the assignments here with the different lanes. So this is to the filter cutoff, operator 2 level, operator 3 level, FX delay left, and the FX delay. The last lane is off. Now, one of the kind of downfalls of this system, I think, is that it isn't easy to clear these, because when you press clear, you are clearing steps, but if you clear steps, like it instructs, select steps to clear, so let's clear those steps. Now we also deleted all the nodes of these steps, so we didn't clear the sequence. We actually cleared the nodes as well, and I think that's a little bit of a inconvenience here. It would have been nice if you could have just took one of these steps and said clear and then clear that lane. It's not something that's breaking anything or anything, but it is a little bit inconvenient. Clearing, by the way, very simple. Just hold clear and select all the steps, and now your entire sequence is clear. Aside from playing things live, you can also step record. And the annoying thing is, even though I just cleared all the steps, the motion is still assigned. even though I said clear, it doesn't clear that stuff, so that's a little bit annoying as well. Only way around this I found is just manually turning off all the motions, which is a little bit idiotic, to be honest, but that sort of works. Now, what I have noticed with the motion recorder, maybe it's a user error, but it still frustrates me, you can't clear these. And it does seem like quite often, if you just turn them off and try to record a new motion, it doesn't quite work as well. So let's say, for instance, we want to record the level of the first, so that sounds a little bit like this. We start to play the sequence. And it says motion recorded. As you can hear, there is no motion because it doesn't seem to track anything. And I'm unsure why this happens. I really have no clue. And it's quite frankly pretty annoying. It also creates a new MIDI track apparently, so it doesn't seem to fully understand what is going on. Now, the interesting thing is if you go into the level EG, in this case for operator 1, and we press record here, and we use this knob, it seems to work perfectly fine. So that's something you can try if you run into the issue where it doesn't seem to track your motions. Try using it through these knobs. It seems to be a little bit more reliable than the other side. I'm not quite sure why it is like that, but apparently that's a thing. But it's a whole extra set of things you can play around with. Together with the mod matrix, of course, you can tie several things to the modulation wheel, which means you can do one single motion controlling several parameters at the same time. It's quite a powerful little feature there in the sequencing. And I think with that we have basically touched all the things there are to say about the Opsix, aside from the custom algorithms. If that's something you're interested in, you can dive into the algorithms and you can move it all the way to the user algorithm. And if you go to MISC, you can move down to user algorithm. Now, the making of FM algorithms is definitely something that's very much outside the scope of my skills. So it's not something I'm too interested in, neither very confident in explaining how it exactly works. I would advise looking into tutorials or the manual for that. But safe to say, if the 40 algorithms that are in here are still not up to your liking, you can create your own algorithm and play around with that. The synth comes with quite a wide memory bank, 500 memory positions. This one secondhand has a bunch of aftermarket patches loaded onto him, so it's quite full of patches. And a lot of these are pretty useful, some classic sounds, some more modern sounds. Definitely pretty nice set of patches. You can find more patches on the internet, of course, if that's your thing. And there you have it, a very extensive look at the Korg Opsix with all its features and in all its glory. Now, there's a lot to say about the synthesizer. As you may have noticed, these videos were a little bit long, and that's because there's just a lot to dig into with this thing. But first let's talk about some of the downsides. Now, the kind of obvious downside, and the one that Korg is probably being punished for the most, is just build quality. It's a very light, very plasticky thing. Now, I'm not too concerned about breaking it or anything. It feels strong enough to survive being used in general use, but it also isn't extremely confidence inspiring. Especially if you're considering this at a full price point of, let's say, 700 euros. it's not that well built. It's fine, but it's not like a $700 build quality. If you get it secondhand, however, for the 300-400 euros where I got it, I would say it's definitely adequate enough. Another thing that people probably complain about is this being a digital synth, which is kind of the nature of these things. FM synths are digital synths, so that's just what it is, and that's something you need to deal with. So let's talk about some of the other downsides here. I think the mod matrix, although very nice, is a little bit limiting with the 12 positions, especially since you have 6 operators. You can quite quickly fill that up if you want to do a little bit more modulation. But I think the bigger crime is that there's just not that many envelopes and LFOs to play around with. The ones we have are very good, but considering 2 of the envelopes are already assigned, you only have really 1 envelope to play around with, although you can of course be creative, but still. And 3 LFOs isn't all that much when you have this much engine available. That's a bit of a downside here. The 16-step sequencer, although functional and having that key trigger ability is pretty interesting, is a bit limiting. It feels a little bit like an afterthought, and there are some weird quirks where it doesn't properly record. Not being able to quickly delete the modulation or the motions they call it is a bit annoying as well, although I do feel that's a software thing, so maybe they can fix that. But let's move on to the good stuff, and there's a lot of it. Having 6 operators gives you a lot of flexibility. There are 40 algorithms available with custom algorithms if you want to dive deeper into that stuff. And this allows you to do a whole lot of FM synthesis in a whole lot of ways, like way more than I think most people are probably going to be interested in. But it's nice to have it on this board. And aside from the FM, of course, you can also use it as a more additive or subtractive synth with 6 voices, which is very, very powerful. Much more powerful than many synths in this price class. It is all digital, of course, but personally I don't mind that all that much. Although that is a small complaint, is maybe they can add like a analog style oscillator in here with a drift control or something to give a little bit more of that flavor in this package as well. I mean, they're already packing a lot of synthesis engines in here, so why not one more, right? The effects are very nice, good selection, although a few weird quirks like the delay is a stereo delay, which is cool, but there's no option to bind the left and right channel together. So if you want to modulate that, that takes up 2 of the modulation slots, which once again are a thing that is fairly limited in the Opsix. There's a good amount of patch storage in the Opsix, which is always nice to see, and all of the patches can be CC controlled as well, which is of course nice. And we have full-sized MIDI DIN on here. Now I know some people think that's very antiquated, but there are a lot of people who use 5-pin MIDI because it just works with a lot of different things. Stereo output and a headphone is of course always a nice to have as well. The other thing that I think is really worth talking about is just the way they set up the user experience here. The way you navigate the menus and navigate controls on a synthesizer this deep with this little of a front panel is really quite inspiring. I think Korg did a great job of making FM, which is very complicated and again well outside the scope of my comfort, extremely accessible. Because FM is usually one of those things where, well, at least if you're not that versed in it, it's more experimental than really something you could plan ahead in. And the thing that really limited me in using FM is that with a lot of synths, it kind of feels like you need to plan ahead. And with the Opsix, because everything is on the front panel, and you might say, well, there's a lot of menus, actually it's not that bad. You can quite quickly move through things, and you can just be like, okay, let's take a sawtooth, let's modulate it with something. And if it isn't to your liking, you can quickly change the ratio, or you can change the threshold, or you can change the modulator's waveform. And it's all very accessible and easy to experiment with. And I think that's really the power of this kind of synthesizer. If you can make FM a experimental and easy to use playground, I think you've succeeded. And I think the Opsix really exceeds in doing just that. It's one of those things where it takes a second to kind of get used to the kind of interface, but at the same time, once you learn one operator, you know all operators, and from there on it's really just a quick process to move in this synthesizer. There aren't any obscure tricks you need to do to access parameters. You don't have to remember any shortcuts or anything. Everything is easily accessible through the encoders and the buttons here, and everything has a name. So it's easy to find, easy to use. And that's really, I think, the one thing that I can't emphasize enough about the Opsix, and that's also the reason why I wanted to buy it, because I already have a bunch of different synthesizers, the JDXA, D50, JV1080, JV880 and a System 1 back there. None of them are really FM synthesizers. This is, and aside from that, it just has a lot of potential in a lot of setups. So if you're in the market for a synthesizer and don't already own a bunch of synthesizers, this is, I think, within especially the second-hand price bracket, but even a new price, a synthesizer that will fill a lot of your needs. It can do pads, it can do basses, it can do leads, bells, basically anything, because you have basically any type of synthesis aside from sampling to your disposal. Well, and granular, I guess. But still, that's a lot of synthesizer for the money. So, well done Korg. I do think that it can be expanded on, because there is still that sort of gray space where there are some things that are a little bit lacking, and it's still one of the synthesizers that isn't universally hailed as the holy grail of FM synthesis. But I really do believe that this is going to be a classic synth in the long run, just for the sheer amount of things you can do with it. So that's the Korg Opsix. If there's any questions about the Korg Opsix, suggestions, things you want to see, drop it down below and let me know. And I will be uploading a small sound demo of the Korg Opsix as well, just to give a little bit of an extra perspective of the sort of sounds you can make, together with a small patching video just to show how you navigate it while patching on the fly. I think that's an interesting thing to cover as well. For now, that's this video, and I see you in the next one.